The city of London gleamed beneath the winter sun. Along the Thames, glass towers caught the light like crystals. One such tower in Canary Wharf bore the proud name Wellington and Fox Limited, one of Britain's oldest investment consultancy firms, its foundation tied to aristocracy, tradition, and silence. At its helm was Edward Langford, the stoic, impeccably dressed managing director known for his Oxford background, tailored Seville Row suits, and a glare that could silence a room. Edward wasn't cruel, just distant. Polite to a fault, but emotionally unreachable. He'd built his empire through logic, strategy, and utter self-control. Love, to him, was an illusion for poets and fools. Then Clara Winslow entered his life. Clara had joined as his executive secretary, replacing an older woman who had retired after 30 years. She was sharp, efficient, and unmistakably British, her voice laced with a soft Essex lilt, her humor dry, and her eyes full of quiet rebellion. From their first meeting, there was something electric. She wasn't afraid to challenge him. Politely, of course, but enough to make him pause. She organized his world, but never submitted to it. Edward found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, how she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she stirred her tea with care. Their interactions began formally. Daily schedules, client briefs, budget meetings, but over weeks, lines blurred. One rainy Wednesday, Clara walked in carrying a stack of files, drenched from the drizzle. Edward, usually composed, offered her his blazer. Their fingers touched. It lingered. That evening, after hours, as the office emptied and the River Thames shimmered below the building's glass walls, Edward stood by the window, his thoughts astorm. Clara walked in with his tea, and he turned to her. "Clara, if I were a different man—" "You don't have to be different," she said softly. He kissed her. It was a kiss that stripped away every wall Edward had built around himself. The city outside faded. The ticking of the clock slowed. They held each other like they'd waited years to do so. From that night, their love lived in the shadows of professionalism. They shared knowing glances in board meetings, brushed fingers in elevators, whispered in the empty break room after hours. On weekends, they met in tucked-away cafes in Notting Hill, far from the suited world of finance. There, he was just Edward, and she was Clara, and they laughed without consequence. One Friday evening, Clara confessed, "I hate hiding." Edward smiled. "Then let's stop." That night, he took her to a boutique hotel in Soho, a quiet, luxurious room above an old bookshop. It rained again, tapping gently on the windows as they lay together, bare and vulnerable. They didn't rush. It wasn't about desire, but about being seen for the first time. They made love like two halves reunited. But London, like all great cities, carries its secrets in whispers. Someone had noticed. A jealous colleague. An ex-rival. A photograph surfaced. Clara leaving Edward's car late at night outside the hotel. The board of Wellington and Fox convened in secret. Though there was no breach of official conduct, the press, ever hungry, had begun sniffing. Headlines brewed. MD's Midnight Muse? Office romance in the towers of power. Edward was summoned. He offered to step down, but Clara beat him to it, resigning that very day. "I won't let them take this out on you," she said. "They already have," he replied. A week passed. Then came the twist. Edward Langford appeared at a press conference in front of the media and the board, not to apologize, but to buy out the minority stakeholders using a silent partnership with a private London trust. He became majority owner overnight. He reinstated himself. And he made a public announcement. A new internal policy ensuring ethical but humane handling of workplace relationships, one of transparency, consent, and dignity. He then offered Clara the newly formed position of head of cultural development, a role designed to rebuild the company's soul. The press didn't know how to respond. But the staff did. They applauded. Clara, however, made one final decision. She declined the job, choosing instead to begin writing her novel, her true dream. They moved to Bath soon after, into a countryside home by the Avon River. There were no glass towers there, Only garden walls, ivy-covered porches, and rain that fell like poetry. She wrote. He brewed tea. They often returned to London, only as lovers, never as boss and secretary again. Love had torn down the old walls of tradition, and behind the soft mist of British mornings, they had found a new kind of empire, built not on stocks or power, but on a love brave enough to be seen. It had been nearly 9 months since Edward Langford had left the shimmering skyline of Canary Wharf for the quieter, rain-softened world of Bath. He and Clara lived in a Georgian townhouse nestled between rows of honey-colored stone homes near the Avon River. The stress of boardrooms and scandal had been traded for cobbled streets, local farmers' markets, and long walks with steaming mugs of coffee. Clara's writing bloomed. Her first novel, Beneath the Office Lights, was already on submission to publishers. But while Clara thrived in this new rhythm of life, Edward lingered. He would sit in the conservatory with his tea, watching the sky gray and brighten, his thoughts often elsewhere. Not sad, just uncertain. Clara noticed, of course. You miss it, she said one morning, not unkindly. Edward looked up from the newspaper. Miss what?
The game.
The office. The chaos.
He paused.
I miss who I was in it. Clara sat beside him, fingers brushing his. You're still him. You're just evolving. But change isn't always gentle. One cold February evening, as they walked home from a reading at the Bath Literary Society, Clara's phone buzzed. It was an email. The subject line made her stop mid-step. Manuscript accepted. £120,000 advance offer. Edward turned as she covered her mouth in disbelief. Her debut novel had been bought by Crown and Keyes Publishing, one of the biggest in Britain. The story of an office affair between a CEO and a secretary had captured imaginations before it even hit shelves. The next week was a flurry: interviews, publicity planning, agents, contracts. And then came the twist. Edward received a discreet letter from Wellington and Fox Ltd. The firm was in trouble. New leadership had driven down profits. Clients were walking away. And the board, in panic, had reached out to the man they once exiled. They wanted Edward back. Not as a puppet, but as the savior. I could help them, he told Clara late one night. I know, she said quietly.
He looked at her, torn.
But it would mean returning to that world. The scrutiny. The headlines. Us being dissected again. I don't mind them talking about us, she replied. But I do mind if you start shrinking in this quiet life. And so he went back, not to the same corner office, but with a new mandate. The firm had moved to a modern space near London Bridge. Clara stayed in Bath, finishing her second novel, visiting on weekends. Their love, now seasoned by time, became something more grounded. But distance is a thief. One evening, Clara arrived at the London flat they shared on weekends. Edward wasn't there. The lights were on. The fireplace crackled. His coat hung by the door. But he wasn't in the flat. His mobile went unanswered. Concerned, she called one of his assistants, a young woman named Isla, newly hired, overly polite. Oh, Edward left hours ago, Isla said. He mentioned dinner with clients at the Ivy. But something about her tone scratched at Clara's mind. She waited until past midnight. He didn't come home. The next morning, Edward walked in, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. I stayed at the office, he said quickly. Late work. Didn't want to wake you. Clara didn't reply. 2 weeks passed. Then Clara received a message. An anonymous tip. Attached was a photograph. It was grainy, blurry, but clear enough. Edward. Dinner. Not just with clients, but with Isla. Laughing.
Clothes.
A hand touching his. Clara stared at it for a long time. That night, she confronted him. He was silent at first, then finally said, it meant nothing. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it meant something. Edward broke. I thought you were moving on. You were becoming you. And God, I felt like a man who had become a footnote in his own life. I gave everything up for you, she said, and still let you find your way back. He reached for her hand. She stepped back. The next morning, Clara packed a small bag and returned to Bath.
She didn't say goodbye.
He didn't stop her. Weeks passed. Her second novel was published. It was darker, angrier, but brilliant. And then, months later, Clara received a parcel at her doorstep in Bath. Inside, a handwritten letter from Edward. Clara, I failed not because I loved less, but because I feared I'd be lost without the world I built. You were always more than my secretary. You were the part of me I kept locked in glass. I no longer want to be powerful. I want to be yours, even if from afar. If you ever write our ending, let me be the man who loved you, imperfectly but truthfully. Always, Edward. The letter wasn't signed at the end, just an ink blot. She folded it carefully, placed it between the pages of her next manuscript, and walked out into the quiet rain. Whether she forgave him, no one knows. But months later, her third book appeared on shelves. The Man in the Glass Office, by Clara Winslow. And its dedication read simply, "To the one who shattered and still loved me through the cracks." A full year had passed since Clara Winslow walked away from Edward Langford and returned to the quiet, cobbled peace of Bath. The literary world now knew her as Britain's rising voice in emotionally raw fiction. Book tours, TV interviews, even a BAFTA-nominated screenplay based on her first novel. Yet in all of it, her eyes still searched crowds. Her laughter always held a half-beat delay. There were no new lovers, no new Edward, just the echo of a man who once looked at her like she was his beginning and his end. Then came the invitation. Cream-colored, embossed, simple. * You are cordially invited to the 120th anniversary gala of Wellington and Fox Limited, London Tower Hotel Ballroom, honoring the firm's legacy. Hosted by Edward Langford. *. She almost threw it out, but didn't. The night of the gala, London was cloaked in late autumn mist. Clara arrived in an emerald gown, classic, elegant. Heads turned as she entered, but her eyes scanned only for one. Then she saw him, Edward Langford, standing beneath a chandelier, older now, but not in a diminished way, like someone who had finally met his own shadow and made peace with it. He spotted her, and everything else in the room evaporated. He moved toward her slowly, deliberately, like a man afraid the moment would vanish. "Clara," he said. She let him speak. "I've stepped down," he told her. "Officially. For good this time. Wellington and Fox belongs to the next generation now." "And what belongs to you?" she asked quietly. He looked at her with that same fierce vulnerability she once fell in love with. "You, if you'll still have me." She said nothing for a moment. Then, "What about Isla?" Edward exhaled. The photo was real, but the moment was misread. She reached for my hand. I didn't stop it. I wanted to feel desired again, even if falsely. I told her the next day that it was inappropriate, and I transferred her. Nothing more happened, but I broke something anyway. "I know." Silence. Then Clara said, "And the anonymous message?" Edward looked confused. "What message?" Her breath caught. He wasn't lying. She turned away, heart pounding. If he hadn't sent the message, who had? The next day, back in Bath, Clara did something she hadn't done in a year. She returned to her old email archives, searching for the anonymous tip. It was sent from an encrypted address, truthseeker@protonmail.uk. Something about it always seemed too convenient. She reached out to a friend in journalism, Rosie, an investigative reporter. Rosie called back the next morning. "Clara, you're not going to believe this. The IP address? Traced to a cafe's public Wi-Fi near your publisher's office." Clara's heart sank. Her own editor, Julian Marks, charming, influential, and always slightly too curious about her and Edward's relationship, had always encouraged her to channel the heartbreak. She met him that evening, face hard with quiet fury. "Why?" she asked, voice barely audible. Julian didn't deny it. He leaned back in his chair. "Your book needed truth. Real pain. Real fracture. Your love story was too neat. I gave it a little crack, and it turned into art." You manipulated my life for a better narrative? I made you a star. She stood. I'd rather be unknown than owned. A month passed. Edward, unaware of any of this, sent her only one final message, a note hand-delivered to her cottage in Bath. Asterisk, no more letters. No more waiting. I'll be at St. Dunstan's Garden, the place you once said was your favorite in London.
Sunday,
5 p.m. If you don't come, I'll let you go. If you do, I'll never leave again. Asterisk. Clara stood with the note for a long time. Then she packed her coat. That Sunday, beneath the rust-colored canopy of autumn trees in St. Dunstan's Garden, Edward stood in a black peacoat, watching every path. For 20 minutes, no one came. And then he heard it. Footsteps.
soft.
Purposeful. Clara appeared. They said nothing at first. Then she walked right up to him, reached into her bag, and pulled out the photograph. Do you see this? She said. Yes. I believed this. It made me leave. But it wasn't you. Not really. He looked her in the eye. Why come back then? She touched his face. Because even lies couldn't destroy what was true. And then she kissed him. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, familiar, and final. 2 months later, Clara's third book was re-released with a new foreword. Asterisk, sometimes the truest love stories don't break. They bend.
They twist.
But if the roots are deep, even glass regrows stronger where it cracked. Asterisk. The final page included a simple image. Edward and Clara, seated in a small cafe in Bath, hands entwined over 2 cups of tea, smiling like they had already lived every ending and chosen each other anyway.